So today my guest is Eddie Obeng, and we're going to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes talking about a range of things. Eddie, what do you think we're going to talk about?
Well, I think I'm going to try and answer some questions which your listeners might be interested in, like how do I make my career work and make my projects work? Answering questions like what will my future look like and how does that fit in with everything I'm reading? I'm also going to make sure that you remember some of the things which will make you successful in the future and give some tips maybe to new or younger project leaders as well. And for the older guys, I'm going to get you to think about how you're going to reinvent yourselves for a world of transformation. That makes you totally relevant forever.
And so stay and listen to Eddie's advice on how us old guys can be relevant and make sure the new guys don't replace us too soon. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organization understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. Today my guest is Professor Eddie Obeng. Eddie is an educator, a trainer, a TED talker, an innovator and an agent provocateur. He's really led the way in some innovative work online with his initiative called QUBE, which we will talk about later. In all the time I've known Eddie, he's been passionate about project management and change management. He tries to make people understand how they can deliver projects more effectively. He's written a number of books on the subject and he speaks extensively. Recently, he had a bestseller in the Amazon. I think he actually got to Amazon #1. He was certainly in the Amazon top 5. So welcome, Eddie.
Hello, Richard. Hi.
And would you like to just expand a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely delighted to be here, Richard. Thanks for inviting me. In the project space, so one of the reasons I struggle sometimes to introduce myself is I work in lots of different spaces. I work in the innovation space. I'm well known in the design thinking space. I work in strategy. So some of my work has been on strategy, leadership, and transforming organizations. So I've got lots of different pies. But in the project management space, I'm probably best known for my work or early work on projects, which was summarized in a book called All Change in the 90s, which was like the first popular book on project management. Prior to that, if you're a project leader, it was because your career had failed and someone in the organization wanted somewhere to put you, so they put you in special or secret projects, and you languished there for 30 years. And the only other project managers were Brunel, building bridges. All Change came out, and all of a sudden, project management became a thing. So that's probably what I'm best known for. I teach, I write, I'm an entrepreneur, and the rest of it's on Google.
But Eddie, you talk about your first book, All Change, and you talk about project leadership. Is leadership a role or is it a mindset?
Oh, leadership is a mindset, definitely. There's a role element to it, but you see, the only way you know somebody's a leader is if they've got followers. So in organizations, it's quite funny because they'll say, this is our senior leadership team, and I've just been appointed to this job called project leader. And I just smile because I look around and they have no followers. I know they're not leaders. Leadership is about mindset, which you put into practice through your behavior, through the emotions you transmit, through the actions you take and how you think and share your thinking. And then other people get sort of magnetically attracted to you to follow you around, and bingo, you become a leader.
Right, so is there a difference in leadership if you've got running a change program or whether you're running a project? You know, can you distinguish these days between change management and project management? Is every change management a project? Is every project a change?
That is such a good question. Okay, so the way I try and help people to understand it is, you know, if I move my little finger, that's called a change. Because change is any alteration, okay? Is it a useful change? Is it improvement? Those are questions we have to ask ourselves. Improvement is something which moves you closer to your goals. So there's a universe of all the changes you could do. Now, most of these changes are sort of, you can see them, you can feel them. They are in the world which you can experience. They're not in the spirit world. Let's call it that for a second, because I'm going to explain about transformation in a second. And so what happens is people set out trying to do something with an objective, with a goal, with maybe even to get away from something if they don't have a goal, or they feel something's not right. And they create a parcel of change. And there's a tasky element in that change, as well as a human-y element. And that's what a project is. But change is the bigger thing. And change can sometimes just be the human-y bit without a tasky bit associated. But there's something else in that change universe which is called transformation. And that's the weird one. Because transformation is a type of change which takes you to a place which you couldn't imagine before you started doing it. And it's different from normal change, and it's definitely different from projects and programs and all those other things.
But you say that, and there's a lot of talk these days about transformation projects and that.
No. People label projects transformation projects. They're not transformation projects.
But can you set out to transform, or do you just transform through the evolution of what you're doing?
You can set out to transform. But most okay. So the best way I use for explaining the difference between change projects and transformation. Okay. So everyone knows what a butterfly is. Okay, and you don't get to a butterfly just by sticking wings on a caterpillar. It's not a thing. Okay. So why is that? Because the caterpillar has certain KPIs, certain things it does, the number of legs it uses, the leaves it eats. So a typical change project or a typical project is the caterpillar decides to climb from one leaf to another, or the change might be eating lots of leaves and getting really fat. But it's still a caterpillar, it's not a butterfly. So how does it become a butterfly? It has to forget a lot of the things which caterpillars are good at. That's a set of actions and changes. It has to build a whole new set of, I'll call them scaffolding, things to keep it alive whilst the butterfly is emerging. Then it has to build all the things which butterflies need to know, which it won't understand when it starts, because you don't go to a caterpillar for flying lessons. And then it's got to be a butterfly, and then it's got to fly and drink the nectar. So that's the sort of journey. And so people say, we're running a transformation project. They're just saying the word because it's fashionable.
But when I'm born as a caterpillar, I'm very happy as a caterpillar. Correct. I can run around my leaf, I can nibble, I'm very comfortable being a caterpillar. Why do I need to transform to become a butterfly?
So here's the thing, there's two headaches happening around you at the same time. And I'll describe both of them. The first is the world has done a very weird thing. When I was a kid, or when you were a kid, or actually almost everyone listening to this podcast, when they were kids, it was more common that in an organization, before it did something, it would know what it was trying to do and how it was going to do it. In other words, it could learn fast and the world was changing. And when you're in that environment, you usually feel very confident. When you go to school, they give you these things called exams. Why? Because they know what the answer is. Makes sense. If you didn't know what the answer was, you couldn't give people exams. So a lot of society, a lot of our mindsets, our heuristics, our ways of working are based on the assumption we can learn fast and the world is changing. But over the past 30, 40 years, the world has accelerated, got more complex, got more integrated, and then a few years ago, the horrible little red monster accelerated all that again. So the net result of that is the pace of change is faster than the pace of learning. The world has changed. So what you do to be successful as a caterpillar is great, but now it's possible that the world doesn't quite fit. The leaves aren't quite where you want them. So that's what gives you the impetus to try to move to becoming a butterfly. But even if you don't become a butterfly, that complex world messes you up because you'll come across problems where you know what you're doing, how to eat the leaf. You'll come across things where you know the goal, but you have no idea how to get there. My nickname for those, by the way, is I call them quest projects. You'll have projects where you know how you're going to do it. I'm going to do some leaf eating, but which leaf should I eat? Method missing objective. You have somewhere you have, I have no idea what to do. What do I do? Don't know the goal, don't know the method. I call those foggy projects. So you get this plethora of projects, and the reason it's a challenge is because as a leader, let's just go back to your leadership question, the way you get people to follow you in those different situations is not the same. So if you know what and how, and they know what and how, you can say wise words, and they'll recognize how smart you are, and they'll probably follow you. If you're lost in the fog, you're not sure where you're going, and you say wise words, they'll laugh at you. The important thing in the fog is to build trust, to take one step at a time. It's a completely different set of behaviors, emotions, actions, and thinking.
But you say that the world sort of started to accelerate in the last 40 years or so.
Well, it's been accelerating all along, but the last 40 years, for most of us, it flipped so that it would change faster than you could learn.
But in that period, we've been delivering projects, and we know better at delivering projects today than we were 40 years ago. Now,
Yes,
people like you and people like me have to carry some blame for that because we've been in the field of project management. People like you have been talking about it, consulting, writing. People have paid you a fortune in the last 40 years.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
The delivery of projects hasn't actually changed. We're no better at it now than we were. So what do we need to do to improve that success rate?
So what's interesting is I think we're better at the paint by numbers projects than we used to. But because these other three type have come across along, we're not very good at those. But the thing, Richard, which is really important is you as a project manager know, and as an excellent project manager, you play all the different tunes. You go, this is the real life situation. This is how I'm going to behave in this situation. This one's a bit more questy. I'm going to sort of stand up front. I'm going to challenge the chief executive. But the education process we put in place for the project managers who are being trained up, we don't always expose them to the complexity of what they're going to hit. And we fool them into thinking there's a list of things they can take and it'll all work. And so I think we've got better in a world which has got more complex, and the outcome of the statistics has stayed roughly the same because we're relying on the same few project leaders like you guys to actually make it work. And the percentage is small, and the bigger population are just fluffing around. So I did two things. One is I looked at why projects were failing, and I tried to work out the causalities. So, for example, oh no, our project's running late. And I'll just do it as a generic thing. Why is that? We had to redo it 5 times. You're kidding. Why was that? Well, we didn't really pay that much attention to, I don't know,
what we were doing.
Exactly. Or our team weren't trained. Here's the thing. If you get any experienced project manager and you say to them, can you predict what's going to go wrong in a project? They will say, yes, we can predict it. And then you ask them, so why do you sit around and make sure it goes wrong? And the truth is, people like you fix it before it goes wrong, but the average project leader sort of knows that if they get the stakeholder management wrong, they're in trouble. If they get the planning coordination wrong, they're in trouble. They know that if they can't do the good leadership and get the team to build, they're in trouble. If they don't learn and review properly, and reviews never happen, because who wants to review? Because then you find out you're wrong. So nobody ever reviews. So they go way off track, and there's a big review, and then everyone discovers you're wrong, but it's too late. So they don't do the things which make projects succeed, and so the projects go off track. In the 90s, there was an organization called the Internet, which is the International Network of Projects, which, Richard, you might remember. That was before we had
I remember that. I was on the board of that.
And there was a chap you might remember called Roland Garries, who was an Austrian.
Yeah,
who came up with this idea of management by projects. And in those days, he was very famous amongst the project managers, but nobody had a clue what he's talking about. Of course, now, with the world accelerating, we're back to people talking about management by projects. So it's just worth bearing in mind that the idea that you have to deal with complex systems through projects is more of a systemic idea, and it's a really good one. That's one. The second headache which you have is that there's an assumption that the future of management is going to be the same as the past. Now, it might be. It really depends on how things like AI and machine learning and so on develop. There's two routes. One route is that they enhance people in their jobs. In other words, you help the operator to see and work better and become more productive. The second is they replace people in their jobs. And I wrote an article, I think it was for either Project Magazine or Project Manager Today magazine, I can't remember, where I basically took all the mechanisms you'd used in a self-driving car, and I said, if a self-driving car was a project, how would it work? So there's short-range forecast, long-range forecast, the LiDAR, etc. And I basically wrote and said you could develop a self-driving project if you had the right data inputs. So it's a bit extreme, but I wanted to make the point that unless we actively progress towards enabling people, the future of work is very different because it doesn't necessarily need people unless we keep the creativity and so on. So that's one point. The other point was that with the project management, we know what's going to go wrong. We know it in advance, but we do nothing. And so a while ago, probably about 10 years ago, I started trying to look into this because I had a really awkward client, a chap called Simon Cooper from JP Morgan. And I'd been working with him for years, and he came to me and said, yeah, we've done some of the stuff you said about project types, but we'd like all our projects to be perfect. So I laughed, as one does. He said, no, we want 100% success with all our projects. So I laughed again, because I thought that's ludicrous. And he said, no, I mean it. So I started finding out by interviewing his people why projects went wrong. And I discovered several things. Number one, if you're a project leader and you're smart, okay, and your project goes really well, you're going to get very fed up. Why? Because you've done the project, there have been no challenges, no problems, senior management didn't see any of it, therefore they think it was easy and you'll never get promoted. Okay? So if you're an ethical, smart project manager, you're going to be angry. However, if you're a smart project leader who's slightly less ethical, you sort of let the problem arise, you present it to your boss, you say, hey, look, we've got some issues here with the delivery of it. And then your boss says, what are you doing about it? It's going great. And you go, well, I've got the right analysis, I'm going to work, I'll come back and update you. And so you go back and update the person, and wow, you are a project manager, you solve the problems. So what happens is there's no initiative, there's no incentive to fix a problem before it happens. Absolutely none. And the other thing is the metrics on projects are completely ludicrous because you're just measuring the end state, but the end state depends on what happens during the project. Do you remember the guy who flew the plane and landed in the Hudson?
Yeah.
Okay, so his plane got hit by the birds and he flew a glide path and landed in the Hudson. So what we did with Simon was I said, well, let's take a project and let's do a glide path of what would happen if there was no project manager. So we took the project and we said, is it foggy? Is there a quest? Is it plane dynamics? Yeah, it's foggy. And then I have two other parameters which tells you about the amount of politics. In other words, are the people driving the change in a separate organization or the same? If it's the same, they always get more politics. And then I have another metric, which is visibility. Can you see progress or not? If you can't, then it gets more horrible, like a software project. So we went through those three dimensions, and we sat there in an afternoon, and we brainstormed all the things which are going to go wrong without project manager intervening. And then we said to the project manager, well, that's your base load. Any of these things go wrong, problem, okay, bad, naughty. And if you fix things in advance, but you've seen them and told us, well done. Now that is a metric, because now you're measuring them against what they are contributing to the project. They now have an incentive to fix problems before they go wrong, because that's what you're measuring them.
And did Simon support that idea?
Yeah, we did it. We actually did it. And then I tried to write about it, and I started writing. I wrote a couple of articles, and all I got was insults and grief. Because of course, everyone knows the project can't be perfect. So I wrote a bit more. I tried to persuade a couple of the bodies to start looking into it. I made some progress with that, but everyone go, perfect project, don't be Eddie's an idiot, okay? So I decided there was no money to be made, so I continued supporting Simon, but I didn't try to sell the product anywhere else because but that's where we need to go if we're serious about management by projects or a world with projects in it, because we can't continue to have a situation where a quarter of the projects literally fail, approximately, am I right? And then about a quarter of them sort of work, but nobody really checks properly. And then the ones in the middle are called van projects, which suck all the living blood out of you, or poltergeist projects, which hang around smelling bad, spooking everyone, never ending. That's the statistic you were talking about, where it's not going any better.
So, Eddie, if we got this problem with the project economy or management by projects, and with all the experience you have, what advice would you give to a young project manager? What three phrases of wisdom would you want to pass on to this individual who is going to be charged with saving the world?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's a great question. I think I probably share with them some of the things which I've learned. The first is around stakeholders. Quick story and then a bit of an explanation. So when I worked at Shell, I was a researcher and I was busy doing lots of research. And then I actually got my project of research, the actual equipment, sabotaged by somebody. And of course, there's big argy bargy, why are you doing that, etc. And this person had literally driven a stake through the heart of the project. Okay, they're a stakeholder, and what had happened was I didn't know this, but they'd had the project before me, and they made a hash of it, and then we passed to me. So of course they were upset because I destroyed their credibility and everything else. So of course they were angry, but it wasn't their fault. It was my fault because I hadn't bothered checking and seeing who my stakeholders were. I just didn't know. And lots of young project managers think, oh, it's my sponsor's rubbish, or oh, I don't get support from my team. No, it's your fault if it goes wrong, not their fault. Because you have to realize a number of things about human beings. Number one, they're not designed for change. You know, we're designed, going back millions of years, just to survive. You know, when the tigers come out of the bushes at you, you run. Why? Because your brain switches off, logic goes off, your emotions turn on, you get scared, and you fill with adrenaline. We're all designed that way. So when you're bringing change, it's just like the tiger jumping out of the bushes. So effectively, you're dealing with all these people with their brains off. So it's your job to make sure their brains are not turned off by surprising them, which is what I did to that chap, okay? Find them before they find you, engage with them, always go really slowly in order to go faster, engage them, find out, learn about them, and so on, get them humanly engaged, using questions, using so and so, and then they come with you. So that'll be number one. Go slow, let's go fast. And remember, any stakeholder errors are your fault. Number two, make sure you've understood what the change is. As I said at the beginning, change and improvement are not the same thing. So is this change worthwhile? You're going to spend your life on it. Just because you've been given it and you're having to be paid to do it doesn't mean it's worthwhile. It might be there's a different change. And start from the cradle. What's the inception of this project? All the way to what happens after I've walked away. What happens in the organization? Is there a process? Do people change how they work? Think about the whole thing and own the whole thing. It's yours. It's not somebody else's. So every time you do any project, you know you're bringing reality, value, and something of use, not just, I have to do it because I'm being paid. Okay. And number three is try to have some fun. Project management is really difficult. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with systems, you're dealing with things which break. You've got to lead, you've got to show the right behaviors, got to get the right emotional mood out there for people so they can keep going through the dark times, helping them to think through and act and so on. So you've got to actually try to bring something which is a little bit positive. And that would be really important for you as well, because change is really difficult. And without that positivity, your resilience will fail and you'll probably not be able to deliver.
Thank you very much for that. Very good, well thought, well developed words of advice for the young project manager.
They won't listen. When I was young, I wouldn't have listened either. I knew better, and I know they think they know better.
I certainly think the stakeholder one is one that too many people overlook. But Eddie, before we finish, one of the things that I've always considered you to be is an innovator. And I think you sort of foresaw virtual distributed teams before most people. I can't remember when you built QUBE, but you've been in that virtual world for probably about a decade.
Yeah. Oh, more than that. So I came out of Ashridge Business School with an idea of setting up a virtual business school, and there was no technology. So that was mid-90s. And so I used a thing called CIX Interchange, which was like type. And then a thing called Lotus Learning Space came along. So we could do a little bit of communication, but just type in a few pictures. And then something called Adobe Connect, so we could actually look at each other. And through that process, I learned what you needed to do if you wanted people to really connect as human beings virtually. Because basically, I made all the mistakes you could. I didn't have many holidays because I was spending my own money. I wasn't funded. So I took note of the lessons of what you needed to do. And then about 2009, I stumbled across a shell of a virtual environment. And I thought I can use this to both create an environment where people can learn and where they can work. So the idea is very simple. If you think about most software tools like PowerPoint and so on and so forth, they're tools. You use them like a tool for doing X, Y, Z. Then these days, people are more familiar with platforms and workspaces. So a platform or a workspace is like Microsoft Teams, Slack. It brings people together and maybe shares documents for them, like 365. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create a transformatory environment where people could automatically run projects well, and where if you were teaching them, they could learn and apply straight away with all their colleagues around the world, rather than off you go on a 3-day course, now come back and put it into practice. So I wanted learn and apply to be seamless and learning in the organization. So it's about transforming. So that's why I started work on QUBE. So the idea was very simple. I thought, no one knows how to behave in a virtual world. So when they come to the virtual world, if I tell them that on QUBE, we write before we speak, they'll all just do it. If I say on QUBE, before we start working on a project, we map out all the stakeholders, they would just do it. If I say on QUBE, what we do is, here's a whiteboard with many tabs. We're going to go through the foggy whiteboard. And what does it say? Foggy projects, first thing, make sure you build trust. Oh, here's a little tool for building trust. Go and do it. So I realized that I could teach them best practice and they would just do it. And when they've done it in the virtual world, because of things like the visual bit being confused in your brain, the sound quality and three-dimensional sound, they would forget they'd done it virtually and they'd be happy to do it face-to-face, which is what we proved quite quickly. So that meant I could teach them how to perform. And then because I built QUBE with campuses, you could have 1,000 people from the same organization, 50, 100 projects, cafes, offices, and they could run big programs of transformatory work and day-to-day work, all in this super real environment. So that's basically what QUBE is. It's the shortcut to getting to the benefits of doing projects really well.
And do you think that is the future, that we will be existing in this virtual world?
I don't know, because there's two strategies companies are adopting. As I said earlier, some of them are using technology to replace people. And for them, QUBE is not interesting because they just want to replace you and what you do, and rags will be automated and blah, 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 etc. So I'm never going to sell anything to them. They're not going to be interested in QUBE because really they just want to get rid of the people and get the work done. The other end of the spectrum are the ones who want to enhance people and make them perform so that they can work together seamlessly, even though in different places. And that's what some of them say they want, and they're interested in QUBE, but there are also people who say that, but actually have no intention of changing. Talking about the aftermath of the little red monster COVID, lockdown, panic, and all the rest of it, all they say is, let's get back to what we're doing. They celebrate. You can see them on social media because they show that this is my first in-person workshop, and they're so proud. What they're saying is, I don't want to go there, I want to go back. So yes, it could be the future, but not the future for everyone. Some people's future will be trying to do what they did before in the past and slowly failing at it because they'll be less effective than the ones who are automating everything. And the people who are automating everything will lose the human spark and the creativity and the empathy. And so they'll be less effective than people who are trying to do things like QUBE, not necessarily QUBE, but things which enhance people, bring them together, give them autonomy, help them learn, put the work into practice. I'll give you an example. We have a project right now. It's a major program for a huge organization. It's a transformation program. So what we're doing is we're literally de-risking the program by, first of all, just asking people what the projects they're running are, and then doing a health check. So now we know what the project leaders don't know. It's like my glide path. So that's all we teach them. We don't go, well, you're a project professional, off you go and do it. No, the person is not good at stakeholder engagement. So we just teach them stakeholder engagement live on the project, de-risks it, improves its chance of success. That's called enhancing people. So that's what you do in a practical sense. But no, I'm not sure it's the future for the whole world. I think that the future for the world is more plural than that, because there are some people who don't want to go down the route of enhancing people. It's not their game.
Eddie, fascinating talking to you. It's always fascinating talking to you. Thank you for sparing the time to join me.
Oh, Richard, I don't need spare time. I'm just honored you invited me. Delighted to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.